Especially in the aftermath of Charlottesville, it's become fashionable to equate the far left and the far right as equivalent to each other. They both hold views considered more extreme than ordinary American politics. They both believe in identity politics, and both seem comfortable dealing in some degree of violence. Both have been linked to historical movements that killed millions of people, and which the West has ostensibly rejected. The equivalency is false, though, and it stems from a deliberate misunderstanding of what the alt-right is, as well as a moral equivocation that should embarrass any thinking person. Anyone who thinks that the alt-right is the heir of Hitler's Third Reich demonstrates that they know neither about either. The German National Socialists of the 1930s were not merely believers in racial homogeneity, but Teutonic supremacists and imperialists, who killed millions of white people on the grounds that they were mongrel races. They were fascistic in that they believed in a top-down, organized, mixed economy and believed that the government should direct the culture and day-to-day lives of the citizenry. Now compare this with the broadly accepted 16 points of the alt-right, which was published in August of 2016 on Vox Day's blog. 1. The alt-right is of the political right in both the American and the European sense of the term. Socialists are not alt-right. Progressives are not alt-right. Communists, Marxists, cultural Marxists, and neocons are not alt-right. National Socialists are not alt-right. That's point 1. It's off the bat. Point 2. The alt-right is an alternative to the mainstream conservative movement in the USA that is nominally encapsulated by Russell Kirk's 10 conservative principles, but in reality has devolved towards progressivism. It is also an alternative to libertarianism. So, libertarians are not alt-right. Doesn't mean they're wrong, just a statement. The alt-right is not a defensive attitude and rejects the concept of noble and principled defeat. It is forward-thinking as a philosophy in every sense of that term. The alt-right believes in victory through persistence and remaining in harmony with science, reality, cultural tradition, and the lessons of history. 4. The alt-right believes Western civilization is the pinnacle of human achievement and supports its 3 foundational pillars, which are Christianity, the European nations, and the Greco-Roman legacy. 5. The alt-right is openly and avowedly nationalist. It supports all nationalisms and the rights of all nations to exist, homogeneous and unadulterated by foreign invasions and immigration. 6. The alt-right is anti-globalist. It opposes all groups who work for globalist ideals or globalist objectives. 7. The alt-right is anti-equalitarian. It rejects the idea of equality for the same reason it rejects the ideas of unicorns and leprechauns. 8. The alt-right is scientific. It presumptively accepts the current conclusions of the scientific method, scientody, while understanding A, these conclusions are liable to future revision, B, that scientistry, which is the institutions of science, are susceptible to corruption, and C, the so-called scientific consensus is not based on scientody but democracy and is therefore intrinsically unscientific. 9. The alt-right believes identity is upstream from culture, which is upstream from politics. 10. The alt-right is opposed to the rule or domination of any native ethnic group by another, particularly in the sovereign homelands of the dominated people. 11. The alt-right understands that diversity plus proximity equals war. 12. The alt-right doesn't care what you think of it. 13. The alt-right rejects international free trade and the free movement of peoples that free trade requires. 14. The alt-right believes we must secure the existence of white people and a future for white children. The only even nominally possibly Nazi-ish thing. And it's defensible on its face of it. Who would be opposed to that, really? 15. The alt-right does not believe in the general supremacy of any race, nation, people, or subspecies. Every race, nation, people, and human subspecies has its own unique strengths and weaknesses and possesses the sovereign right to dwell unmolested in the native culture it prefers. 16. The alt-right is a philosophy that values peace among the various nations of the world and opposes wars to impose the values of one nation upon another, as well as efforts to exterminate individual nations through war, genocide, immigration, or genetic assimilation. Continuing the quote from the page, TLDR, the alt-right is a Western ideology that believes in science, history, reality, and the right of a genetic nation to exist and govern itself in its own interests. The patron saint of conservatives, Russell Kirk, wrote, quote, "The great line of demarcation in modern politics," Eric Voegelin used to point out, "is not a division between liberals on one side and totalitarians on the other. No, on one side of that line are all those men and women who fancy that the temporal order is the only order, and that material needs are their only needs, and that they may do as they like with the human patrimony. On the other side of the line are all those people who recognize an enduring moral order in the universe, a constant human nature, and high duties toward the order spiritual and the order temporal." End quote. This is no longer true, assuming it ever was. This is Vox Day speaking again. The great line of demarcation in modern politics is now a division between men and women who believe they are ultimately defined by their momentary opinions, and those who believe they are ultimately defined by their genetic heritage. I would add cultural heritage, but perhaps that's redundant in this case. The alt-right understands that the former will always lose to the latter in the end, because the former is subject to change. And that's the end of that quote. So, the moral equivocators now are charged with this question. Where is the similarity to Nazis or fascism more broadly in this view? Where is it? Is it only in the reality of race? Because if that were the case, then America prior to 1964 and 65 would also be comparable to Nazism. Now, is it more likely that we were fighting against our ideological allies in the 1940s? Or is it more likely that the analogy has been slightly abused in recent years, and perhaps that people's understanding of what they're talking about isn't all they think it to be? Nearly every country on Earth prior to the 20th century, and many first world countries to this day, believe in and act upon the reality of race. Japan, Iceland, China, and Israel, just a few offhand examples. So, is Israel like Nazi Germany? Is Netanyahu Hitler? The alt-right is a new movement that is reflective of old truths and old ways of governing things, things that existed long before Hitler's Germany. Antifa, by contrast, carries two symbols that are, in fact, about a century old: the Antifascische Aktion black and red flags, and the hammer and sickle itself. They are the open heirs of radical leftist movements of Italy, the Arditi dei Popoli, and of Germany, and of communism more generally. Now, the moral equivalency is, in my opinion, even worse. The alt-right has been repeatedly lied about, and its members and anyone associated with them are physically and financially attacked. Just a recent example, my friend Augustus Invictus recently had all of his fundraising platforms erased and was subsequently unable to attend a conference he'd been scheduled to speak at. When has the alt-right instigated violence? We know that they're certainly capable of violence, but when have they ever started it? Antifa, by contrast, has instigated violence repeatedly, as has Black Lives Matter. We saw the Project Veritas tapes of Democratic activists paying the homeless and the mentally ill to try to pick fights with Trump supporters so as to make Trump supporters look violent. Isn't that funny? The claim that these two sides are equal and equivalent is like morally equating the mugger and the man who punches the mugger. It is self-righteous, self-satisfied pretension, and will only generate resentment from people who care about who these people really are and what the truth actually is.